What's happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRFTV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition. We're going to go back and take a look at some racing from the entirety of that week or weekend that you will, whatever you want to call it. Starting with Thanksgiving Day, we'll take a look at a graded stakes race from Aqueduct there. We'll go through Friday. We'll go through some Saturday action as well. And we'll also give you some other little tidbits. We'll give you some stakes montages. We'll give you a little bit of a what's to come for the week ahead on DRFTV. We'll also give you the weekend's best as far as buyer speed figures are concerned. If you listen to this thing in podcasts like most of you do, you've got YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you take your podcasts, take your podcasts with milk, take them with sugar, whatever. Wherever you get your podcasts, write us a review, give us a positive rating, always greatly appreciated. Questions, comments, concerns, again, you can fire away underneath the video player on YouTube, or if you are so inclined, you can send me a tweet on Twitter, again, at Bernier_Matt. Let's kick things off with the race that we'll touch on from Thanksgiving on Thursday. And I recognize there were other races from Thursday, but those ones will all be featured in the stakes montage. This one from Aqueduct, though, 6 furlongs on the main track. It's a pretty historic race in the grand scheme of things. It's the Fall Highweight, Grade 3 event. You had a number of horses in here. The lowest weight in this field was 126 pounds. The high weight was 131. So we had a good old-fashioned handicap in here. Grade 3 event. Only a field of 6. Your post-time favorite was Runaway Loot, bet down to odds of 7-5. Really coming in here in great form. And also, when you looked at it from the way this race looked like it could set up on paper, looked like you had a pretty good situation in here. Unfortunately for he or anyone else that backed him, he didn't really do much running. There was a nice horse that did some running, though, and that was Life in Shambles. Here's the stretch run of the Fall Highway.
Responding as they reach the top of the stretch, Always Sunshine narrowly in front. Heartwood has tested him and continues to fight on, and Life in Shambles is finishing with a flourish on the outside. They're coming to the 16th pole. Heartwood on the outside, just in front, joined by Life in Shambles. Life in Shambles surging to victory in the Fall Highway. Heartwood was second.
Life in Shambles gets the job done at odds of 6-1 over Heartwood, who really, you could make the case that he ran too well to lose in here as the second choice at odds of 5-2. And Always Sunshine, the horse that was out there on the front end, cutting out the fractions, took a little bit of heat from Heartwood, ends up running third at odds of 6-1. Celtic Chaos was just far too far back, had too much to do. He runs fourth at odds of 9-2. And then again, obviously, the beaten favorite, who never really looked like he was going to threaten at any point, Runaway Loot at odds of 7-5. Let's take a look a little bit more at the winner. Life in Shambles, 10 of 41 lifetime. This is a blue-collar type. 11 other times second or third. He is just under $750,000 in career earnings. Owned by Era Abrahamian. Trained by Jason Service. Bred by Christophe Clement and Don M. Robinson in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Irad Ortiz Jr. Sired by Broken Vow. And the dam is Life. And she is by Anaba. Life in Shambles earned a 95 buyer speed figure, winning the Fall Highweight. 119 time form U.S. rating. Came home in his final eighth of a mile in 13:04. The oldest horse in the race, carried 127 pounds. Heartwood, who was up there and, again, ran quite well, all things considered. He finishes a valiant second. 94 buyer and a 122 time form U.S. rating. The pace setter, Always Sunshine, earns a 92 buyer and a 123 time form U.S. rating. You can see not a heck of a lot of passing going on in this race. The top 3 finishers were 1, 2, 3 essentially throughout the entirety of the run. They just changed positions. This was not the most visually impressive race you're ever going to see. The final times were pedestrian at best, but again, given the weather and given the cold nature of the racing surface and just the weather in general, in the Aqueduct area, the Ozone Park area down in New York, the fractions 23 and 3, 46 and 1. They stopped the clock in 12 flat. So again, this isn't going to be one that we write home about and we remember for years and years to come. But at the end of the day, a solid enough effort from Life in Shambles. Jason Service, his trainer, has indicated there's a potential that he comes back in the Gravesend at Aqueduct on December the 23rd. Feels like he fits in these kind of races. Feels like this is what he is at this point. Maybe he ends up being sort of a winter. We've seen it a number of times in the past where you get certain horses that just take their game to the next level in the winter, whether it's because it's softer competition that they're facing or because they can just handle the cold weather a little bit better than some of the other ones. Perhaps Life in Shambles is case in point. He is a 7-year-old, and he is back in the winner's circle. He gets the job done in the Grade 3 Fall Highweight with a 95 buyer and a 119 Timeform US rating. Headliner at Churchill Downs on Friday was the Grade 1 Clark Handicap for 3-year-olds and up, 1 1/8 miles on the main track. Let's take a look at the field. 8 of them were signed on. Your post-time favorite was Seeking the Soul for Dallas Stewart. He was looking for back-to-back victories in the Grade 1 Clark. Most recently, he ran a very, very valiant second in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, but we know that this 1 1/8 miles distance, certainly within his scope and within his realm of possibilities, but there were other very interesting sort of alternatives. You had Bravazzo, the 3rd-place finisher in that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, the lone 3-year-old taking on Elders in here. You had Leo Frick, who most recently was a winner of a graded stakes race in the Fayette at Keeneland, and you also had the runner-up that day, Prime Attraction, coming back in from Southern California. They were the 4 choices. Everyone else, pretty much long shots, double-digit odds, and it played out very, very formfully as we take a look at the results. Leo Frick prevails by a neck over Bravazzo as the 3-1 third choice. Bravazzo was the 2nd choice in here at 2-1, and your 3rd-place finisher was Seeking the Soul at odds of 7-5. Let's talk about Leo Frick. This was his first career Grade 1 victory. He's 8 of 14 lifetime, just under $1 million in career earnings, owned by Steve Landers Racing LLC, trained by Brad Cox, bred by Peter E. Bloom Thoroughbreds LLC in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Florent Giroux, and you can see the pedigree. He's by Candy Ride out of an Unbridled Song mare named Lady Godiva. 102 buyer speed figure, 124 Timeform US rating for Leo Frick, winning the Grade 1 Clark Handicap. For what it's worth, Timeform US had the Churchill Downs main track on Friday afternoon, color-coded slightly red, or they'll call it the light red, meaning it was slightly speed-friendly. Perhaps that helps a horse like a Prime Attraction, who was the one that was out there cutting out the fractions. Perhaps it compromises a horse like Seeking the Soul, but we'll dive into each of those horses a little bit more in a moment. The fractions, 23-2, 47-2, 11-3 for 3/4. They stopped the clock in 48-2. I thought Leo Frick, in the grand scheme of things, had a beautiful trip. I thought Flo rode him perfectly, keep him down on the inside in the pocket, splits horses rounding the far turn, and this horse dug in gamely. My concern with Leo Frick coming into this race was the 1 1/8 miles, and I know he got the 1 1/8 miles at Keeneland most recently, but I felt like it was a different sort of 1 1/8 miles with that long stretch run at Churchill Downs. Well, guess what? Didn't matter. He dug in gamely, fought on valiantly. This was a very impressive effort from Leo Frick. Brad Cox, in the sort of post-race situation in the days following, had made mention that a quote is that the Pegasus is an option that we'll keep on the table. So that could potentially be the next spot you see a horse like Leo Frick in. We also know that Brad Cox has a stable of horses at Oaklawn, so I would imagine if it's not the Pegasus, maybe you see him back in Hot Springs here in a few months. I thought it was a very good effort from him. I think this is clearly the best race he's ever run. Now, he did benefit from having everything go his way as opposed to a horse like Bravazzo, the runner-up, who had to take the overland route coming from slightly off the pace. He finishes second, earns a 102 buyer, a career best figure, as well as a 123 Timeform US rating. He comes home, gets his final 8th in 12:41 compared to Leo Frick's 12:45. Now, the difficult thing that I'm having a hard time sort of deciphering when I go over this race, I've watched the replay 4 or 5 times, I don't know if Bravazzo ultimately, he traveled 30 feet more, according to Trackus, than Leo Frick did. That certainly makes up the difference, and then some, for a neck margin of defeat. So you can look at it that way and say he took the worst of it, and he ran, very, very gutsy race to run second, and you can make the case that he ran the best race. You can also look at it the other way, and I hate to say it, but this is the way that I'm slightly leaning at the moment. He had every opportunity to go by him down the stretch. And if he is the better horse, I would imagine you would have gotten it done. I'm a big fan of Bravazzo. I've always been a fan of his. I think he's a neat horse. I think he's that old blue-collar type that shows up and runs. Lucas has done a great job with him. The good news is there's still going to be other opportunities, it sounds like, for us to make determinations and make calls on Bravazzo going forward. This race, I would be curious to know anybody else's thoughts. At Bernier_Matt on Twitter. I'm torn between looking at him saying, okay, that 30 feet that he carried extra as opposed to Leo Frick, that was the difference, and he still ran the best race. Or he had the entirety of one of, if not the longest stretch in North America to go by Leo Frick, and he didn't get there. So I want to give Leo Frick some credit for that, but at the same time also, do I look at that and say, don't know if I love that from Bravazzo. We'll find out. Time will tell. Maybe he'll continue to move forward. A horse that I was concerned with this effort because I thought there was really no excuse. On paper going in, I thought Seeking the Soul was very clearly the best horse in the race. And he made up some nice ground rounding the far turn. He followed Bravazzo for a bit, split horses. I thought Velasquez gave him a very nice ride. And then Seeking the Soul just never, ever changed leads at any point, and he just kind of flailed along down the stretch run there. To me, that's a sign of, keep in mind, this is a horse that missed a very, very long time from the Pegasus World Cup last year into his return effort, which I believe was in July at Indiana Grand. You know, he's still a nice horse. He earned a 97 here and a 120. There's no reason to think that on his best day he wouldn't be right there at the wire with those top two. Certainly wasn't at his best on Friday, but now I'm starting to wonder. You look at that and go, boy, you know, he never really had done that. And considering he has had some injury history, you just hope that there's nothing wrong with him in a situation like this. Hopefully we'll see Seeking the Soul come back as a 6-year-old. In Prime Attraction, he actually earned a 122 Timeform US rating, only a 96 from a buyer's standpoint. I thought Kent rode him perfectly. You're down on the inside, you break, you go, you take him as long as you can, and unfortunately, he just isn't quite as good as the top 3 horses in this spot. He runs a solid 4th in this spot here. But Leo Frick, he wins the stretch long battle with Bravazzo. A very, very game effort. He is now a Grade 1 winner, a 102 buyer, and a 124 Timeform US rating. The next spot we may see him in could be the Pegasus World Cup. If not there, I'd imagine probably down at Oaklawn over the winter. Friday out at Del Mar, 1.5 miles on the turf course. This was the field for the Grade 2 Hollywood Turf Cup. Only a field of 7. You had an East Coast shipper in here in Bigger Picture that I figured was going to ultimately end up going off favored. He did not. He ended up going off as the second choice at odds of 5-2 beneath Mike Smith. Chicago Style, a horse that's always hinted at some ability, has always shown that when things break his way, he can come with a big run. And unfortunately for him, in graded stakes company, he's always just been a little bit on the unlucky side. He's always been close, but never quite gotten over the hump. He's also been a horse that has had some major physical issues throughout his career. It's nice to see that they finally got him ready to go in a race like this, of this magnitude. Here's the stretch run of this year's Hollywood Turf Cup.
Now Chicago Style comes with his run on the extreme outside. Beachview in the green, desperately looking for him. Beachview, nowhere to go. Homeward bound, and here comes Chicago Style flying. Chicago Style down the center of the track on the inside. Bigger Picture. Chicago Style, Chicago Style.
Chicago Style gets it done as the 9-5 favorite over Bigger Picture by a neck. Bigger Picture was 5-2. And Beachview, a horse we'll talk about a little bit more, he finishes 3rd at odds of 7-1. Let's discuss Chicago Style a little bit more. Again, he is a 5-year-old and he's only raced 11 times. That just goes to show you the sort of physical problems that he has had. He is 6 of 11 lifetime, 2 other times, 2nd or 3rd. He is just under $300,000 in career earnings, owned by Glen Hill Farm, trained by Tom Proctor, bred by Glen Hill Farm in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Drayden Van Dyke. In the pedigree, he is by Kitten's Joy out of a Mr. Greeley mare named You Go West Girl. 96 buyer speed figure, 120 Timeform US rating for Chicago Style, winning the Hollywood Turf Cup. He comes home in 22.71. That's a very nice, potent late kick from this horse. Always felt like additional distance is what he had wanted. He came back in that Lure Stakes out at Santa Anita. I thought he was disappointing that day. I didn't like him coming into this race. I was trying to beat him all together, and clearly it was the wrong move. He ran quite well. The concern you always have to have with a horse like this is how many times are we going to see him? Because, you know, again, he ran in that John B. Connolly earlier in 2018, and he was going all the way until, what, October? And that was for a prep race to get him ready for this race. Look, it all worked out, but you always have to be fearful that you're not going to see a horse like this too many more times just because he's had a history of physical problems. But a nice effort, and congratulations to the connections. Bigger Picture in the grand scheme of things, thought it was a pretty good trip. And we'll dive into the way the race shook down a little bit because I think that played a very, very large part in a couple of these horses coming from farther off of the pace and actually going in and getting a piece of this thing. Bigger Picture was really in a pretty good spot, all things considered. When the real racing began, when that was really entering the far turn for the second time, that's when the real racing started, because you had a horse like Can't Help Believing between horses, split, and I kind of like what Joe Talamo did. He said, we're going way too slow. This is just not going to materialize, and you know what Ashley Love Sugar is capable of, a big race on his best day, and if you just allowed that pace to continue being dawdling, the fractions were 24-2, 50-3, 3/4 in 16-1, and they've stopped the clock in 2:28-2. Had they not picked up the pace, Ashley Love Sugar could have gotten very brave out there. So I like what Talamo did. I can't help believing it didn't work out, but I understand entirely why he went after him. But that also, in turn, made Ashley Love Sugar go for home. That made a horse like Marquis Water go for home. And it helped set things up for a horse like Chicago Style, a horse like Bigger Picture, and a horse like Beachview. Bigger Picture, I don't think he is quite what he once was. Doesn't mean that he can't still be competitive in races like this. He finished in 23:05, earned a 95 buyer and a 120 time form US rating. Beachview is probably the one in this race that you want to throw into your DRF horse watch, because I understand he had that pace to run at the end, and in the grand scheme of things, he had a dream trip down on the inside, saved every inch of ground beneath Rafael Bejarano. The problem is when the real running started, this horse had nowhere to go. He was loaded for bear, finally was able to sneak up the inside and finished very, very well. Came with a belated run, finished in 22.99. If he had gotten clear earlier, I think he at least threatens to win this race. He was 7-1 in this spot. It'll be interesting to see where he comes back. Considering this was his first start since the summer meeting at Del Mar when he ran on the dirt track. I think this is a good race, and at face value, if you just looked at the chart, you would say, okay, well, that sounds about right. 7-1, came with a nice little bit at the end, but he was only good enough for third. I do believe if he were able to get clear a little bit earlier, perhaps he gets in there and has at least a real threat to win this entire thing. Beachview might be one you want to throw in your DRF horse watch. For the rest of the field, Marquis Water, I thought he acquitted himself just fine considering the pace heated up there in that middle portion going into the far turn the second time. Ashley Love Sugar, again, he just kind of got ganged up on the front end, but I thought Tyler Bays rode him just fine, and you got to want him. He was a little bit wide, but at the same time, he was another sort of product of that pace situation where they finally started running those horses that were 1, 2, 3, 4 when the real running began. They ended up finishing 4, 5, 6, 7. So something to factor in when you take a look at this race. Chicago Style, when he is right, he is a nice long distance horse. I didn't like him coming into this spot. He made me pay. He gets the job done with a 96 buyer and a 120 time form US rating, winning the Hollywood Turf Cup. Feature at Del Mar on Saturday was the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap, a mile and a 16th on the grass. Let's take a look at that field. 12 of them signed on. Post-time favorite, Synchrony for Mike Stidham, coming in from the East Coast. Joe Bravo into ride. We know on his best day what he's capable of. Most recently, he had run in the Shadwell Turf Mile at Keeneland against miles better company. Really, this thing was going to boil down to what kind of trip would he work out, because his best running style, in all reality, is coming from farther off of it, coming from the rear of the pack. Outside of him, you would have needed to either take a horse like Pinchek, who was coming in from Europe, who was one of the fresh faces in here. But outside of that, you were kind of stuck with the same old, with a lot of horses in Southern California that have taken turns beating one another. You needed to decide which one of those did you want. I suppose there was one horse, though, that he's not officially a California horse because he has run all over the place, but he's recently been taking up his residence down there, and it seems like he's really enjoying it, that being Caribou Club. Here is the stretch run of the Seabiscuit.
He Will is starting to run on late from behind. They come for home, and Caribou Club is hooked to the outside. And here comes Caribou Club with a big run. Secretary at Ward tries to keep him at bay, but Caribou Club strikes the front. And Caribou Club, a captivating win today in the Seabiscuit. Caribou Club, Synchrony came like a rock.
Caribou Club at 7-1 gets the job done beneath Joe Talamo. Secretary at War, a very, very gutsy effort. The longest shot in the race at 72-1. He's only defeated by a length and a quarter to finish second. And Synchrony, little bit of tough trip, for Synchrony, rounding the far turn. He comes with a very, very nice finish to run third at odds of 8-5. Big score rounds out your superfecta at 4-1. Let's discuss Caribou Club. 6 of 16 lifetimes, 6 other times. Second or third, over $444,000 in career earnings, owned by Glen Hill Farm, trained by Tom Proctor, bred by Glen Hill Farm, this one in Florida. Ridden victory by Joe Talamo, and you can see the pedigree. He is by City Zip out of a Broken Vow mare named Broken Dreams. 97 buyer speed figure for Caribou Club, winning the Seabiscuit. Beautiful trip, beautiful ride from Joe Talamo. Sad about mid-pack. Talamo angles him out, about 2 paths, splits horses, goes on for home, comes home in 28:57. Craig Bernick, the owner of Glen Hill Farm, was quoted in, I believe, Sunday's form from Steve Anderson in an interview saying, a mile and an eighth, seems like that's probably a little bit too far for him, which I would agree with. I think he is a miler. Craig seems to think the same as well, but he's also capable going down the hill at Santa Anita. So this is a nice, versatile horse. If you remember going months back, I had mentioned Caribou Club as a horse that I thought would be interesting in a race like the Woodbine Mile. So perhaps next year as a 5-year-old, maybe that could be a spot for him. Because again, that 1 mile, I know it's 1 turn, so it's a little bit more demanding, but I think that's really kind of right in his wheelhouse. Caribou Club has developed into a very, very talented horse. Nice horse here as a 4-year-old. Going to wrap up his season on a winning note. Secretary at War probably ran too well to lose given the way this thing shook down. Relatively close to the pace. 23-3, 47-4 for a half, 12-1 for 3/4. They stopped the clock in 41-1. He comes home in 29-14. Only 1 horse got him. It was a good effort, good ride from Ruben Fuentes. Unfortunately, just couldn't quite hang on at the very end. He runs a very, very solid second. Synchrony, I made mention of that little bit of trouble. Rounding the far turn, Joe Bravo is getting ready to go. He's got a ton of horse, and he just kind of gets stuck in behind horses very, very briefly. It wasn't a disaster, but it certainly hindered his chances of winning this race, because I think if he was able to really let him roll when he wanted to, perhaps it's closer what the final margin was between he and the winner, which ultimately was about 1.5 lengths or 1 3/4 lengths. I think he probably would have gotten closer to actually being competitive as far as the win is concerned. And it's just unfortunate racing luck. It wasn't anything that Bravo did wrong. He just got stacked up and behind horses, and you know what? Sometimes it's the way the cookie crumbles. I thought this was a good effort from Synchrony. One other horse that I want to throw out there that may seem a little bit odd that this is the one that I'm going to throw in my DRF horse watch is He Will. He Will is a horse that I've always thought there is talent there. Even at one point, about 1.5 years ago, I thought he had grade 1 caliber talent. Well, clearly that was a little bit ambitious as far as those thoughts are concerned. But I do still think he can run quite well. And I thought Kent DeSormo did everything that he could given the circumstances. He broke from the far outside post. He immediately went down to save ground. Going on to the backside, he angles him out into the clear relatively early, if we're calling spade a spade, but he's about 5 or 6 paths off the rail, and unfortunately he just got stuck very, very wide going into the far turn. At that point, Kent pushes the button, they go. He moves up to about mid-pack, and down the lane, he actually kept on relatively well in the grand scheme of things. You go through, you can look at it incrementally in Formulator, or if you're so inclined, you can go over and take a look at the track as T-charts, and those internal fractions, He Will ran every bit as fast, if not faster, than everyone else in this race. So, long story short, I'm looking at this saying, I've always thought he's better at a mile, so maybe a slight turn back in distance here. I also believe he's probably best suited for Calbred Company, and I know he's 6 years old, he's soon to be 7. He's the kind of horse I'd love to see them get him back into some sort of a Calbred Stakes race. I understand, easier said than done. You have to find those races to run in them, but even if it's not a Calbred race, just get him back to a mile, and I think with a little bit of a better trip in there, I wonder if He Will still has a race in him. He was 22-1 in here. Depends where he would show up, what kind of price he would be. But He Will, I'm still interested in him going forward. I think there could be some spots for him when it's all said and done. Caribou Club, though, was the beneficiary of a great setup, a great ride from Joe Talamo, and he just happened to be in really, really good form. Tom Proctor, his trainer, had him ready to roll, and he got the job done in the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap on Saturday. Caribou Club gets the job done with a 97 buyer. Co-headliner at Churchill on Saturday was the Goldenrod for 2-year-old fillies. 1 1/16 on the main track. Let's take a look at that field. 8 of them signed on. Post-time favorite, Restless Rider. No surprise there. Restless Rider was the second-place finisher in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies a few weeks back beneath the Twin Spires. She'd never been out of the exacta in 5 lifetime starts leading into this race on Saturday afternoon. 3 to 5 seemed fitting enough. You had an import coming in from New York for Chad Brown and Break Curfew. She was going to be trying 2 turns and legitimate company for the first time in her career. Outside of those two, really, you could make some cases for some longer prices if you were so inclined. Ultimately, one of those interesting alternatives got the job done. Leora prevails over Restless Rider. Leora at odds of 27-1. She was the longest shot in the race. Don't know if she should have been the longest shot. 27-1. Big, big mutual. She comes back and pays $56 and some change. Restless Rider runs second at odds of 3 to 5, and High Regard rounds out your trifecta at odds of 26-1. If you played the try for 50 cents, comes back a shade under $200. Leora. She's 2 of 4 lifetime, 3 times in the money from 4 lifetime starts, $176,580 in career earnings, owned by Coffee Pot Stables, trained by Wayne Catalano. Bred by Delridge Farm LLC in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Channing Hill. And the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card, she is by Candy Ride out of a Giants Causeway mare named Giant Mover. 75 buyer speed figure, 95 time form U.S. rating, for Leora winning the Goldenrod. Restless Rider, a 75 buyer and a 95 time form U.S. rating as well. When you look and see, Restless Rider actually finished faster than Leora did. She comes home in 31:30 as opposed to Leora's 31:55. And I do believe much of this had to do with the way this race was run. You take a look at those fractions, 24-4, 49-3, 14-3 for 3 quarters. They stopped the clock in 46-1. Leora was able to get out there and just really set a pretty tepid pace in the grand scheme of things. You see that second quarter was nearly 25 seconds. She was coming off of a maiden score, but she did so... I didn't think visually it was the most impressive, but as I said in the post that I put on DRF Live on Saturday, it's hard to argue with a 9+ length victory in any kind of race, and that's exactly what she did last time. She was able to get out there, and she kicked away nicely. If you thought she was going to get out there to a relatively soft lead this time around, then she was obviously an interesting candidate to come back with another big effort. Now, this is a combination of things as well. I think it's a combination of the way this race played out for Leora from a pace standpoint. She didn't face much pressure early on. She was able to get out there. Restless Rider, there really was no excuse. I mean, she had dead aim turning for home. It looked like at one point she even poked her nose in front, and then she ended up having Leora come back on her on the inside. This is sort of, I would file this away going forward next year and into, you know, the Breeders' Cup of 2019, but even some of these other big races and these big events. When you look at a filly like Restless Rider, she's never been out of the exacta in 6 lifetime starts. She's 3 wins, 3 seconds. But when the connections make it clear, and they had a very, very well-documented, mapped-out plan, where she was going to peak in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. When you go through and do all that, and then you still come back and you run it in another race, and guess what? We'll still have probably at least one other opportunity to try to exploit that coming up next weekend in the Cigar Mile. These races were not the goal. The goal was the Breeders' Cup, and these horses were ready to go and crank down. And then they come back in these spots, and sometimes they can be upset. They can be taken down. This filly, she goes down at odds of 3-5. You had Nix Go, which we'll talk about that more momentarily. That was more circumstantial, I think, than anything, but not unheard of. Again, another horse that at a short price ended up going down. It's happened in the past. Just something to keep in the back of your mind with many of these races, and even the Triple Crown races. Leading in through certain things. The Kentucky Derby is the goal for a number of those horses and other instances like that. And then let's say they come back 2 weeks later and some of them end up running in a race like the Sir Barton at Pimlico as opposed to a race like the Preakness. Because, oh, you know what, maybe it was a little bit too tough, but we really were ready to go. We had the horse primed and ready to run. Well, they come back in that next spot, and sure, they're getting class relief, but at the same time, the goal was that race 2 weeks ago. So just something to keep in the back of your mind when you go forward and you look at so many of these races. What is the goal? And after the goal has come and gone, if they're still going, sure, you can look at it and say they're in good form and they're going to keep going on. Or you can look at it the other way and say, maybe this is an opportunity to try to take a chance against. Thought everyone else, for the most part, ran fair with the exception of Break Curfew. Break Curfew, very clearly, you look at this filly, and this, to me, reminds me quite a bit of Complexity, the horse we saw from Chad in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where trying to go longer, and it just didn't work. This horse didn't want any part of this distance. I think ultimately end up turning her back, and she could end up being a nice one-turn horse going forward as a 3-year-old. And who knows? Maybe they'll try her again at 2 turns at some point. Maybe she didn't appreciate the sloppy sealed track. Could have been a number of different things. She just did not fire her A game here on Saturday. A horse that did, though, is Leora. Leora ran quite well in here. I think she's one that, you know what? She hasn't really done a heck of a lot wrong. She'll have to continue to improve, but there's no reason to think that she won't. She's only raced 4 times, and she's done some good things in 4 lifetime starts. And now, she's a graded stakes winner. She's worth her weight in gold as far as her future prospects going forward. Forget about the racing, but once we get done with that post-racing career and we go on to the broodmare side of things, she can end up being something very, very valuable. So, Leora ultimately prevails in a stretch-long duel with Restless Rider. Restless Rider, the 3-5 favorite, is defeated by the longest shot on the board. Leora at 27-1 gets the job done in the Grade 2 Goldenrod, 75 buyer, 95 time form US rating. Last deep dive here on the recap show will be the Kentucky Jockey Club. 2-year-olds, a mile and a 16th on the main track at Churchill Downs, one of the co-headliners anyway on Saturday afternoon. Take a look at the field. You had 14 2-year-olds. Usually this is a recipe for disaster, but all things considered, I think everyone worked out a pretty decent trip. You could have gone a few different ways. Nick's Go was the logical sort of horse in here. He was bet down to 3-1. He was the favorite. The runner-up in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, also already a Grade 1 winner, winning the race at Keeneland, the Breeders' Futurity back in October. Outside of him, who were you looking at? A horse like Signalman, the third-place finisher, a rallying and belated sort of effort from him, finishing third in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You also had horses like King for a Day coming in from New York for Todd Pletcher. You also had Dunf, who was very, very impressive visually in 2 lifetime starts for Mike Maker. Ultimately, I think the dynamics of this race and the circumstances led to much of the results that we had. And ultimately, Signalman was the one that prevailed here in this year's Kentucky Jockey Club at odds of 7-2. He wins over Pluska Parfait, who runs second at 14-1. Limonite runs third, coming from the back of the pack at 20-1. And King for a Day for Pletcher runs fourth at odds of 9-2. Let's take a look at Signalman now. 2 of 5 lifetime. Never been out of the money in 5 lifetime starts. Under $500,000 in career earnings. $448,990 to be exact. Owned by Lewis Burnson LLC and Magdalena Racing, Sherry McPeak. Trained by Ken McPeak, and you can see he's bred by Montcule in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Brian Hernandez Jr. and the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by General Quarters out of a trippy mare named Trip South. 84 Beyer speed figure, 110 Timeform US rating for Signalman winning the Kentucky Jockey Club. It is worth noting, again, when you take a look at the chart and you consider how this race was run, the quarter, half, and three-quarter calls, according to Timeform US, were all color-coded red, meaning they were helping horses come from farther off of the pace. You take a look, there were 2 horses relatively close to the pace in the top 4, Signalman as well as King for a Day. Pluska Parfait and Limonite both came from well out of it, and when you look and see the 3 horses that were first, second, and third at the half-mile call, where did they finish? Topper T was the pace setter. He finishes 8th. Nick's Go was in second. He finishes 11th. And Blue Steel was third. He finishes 13th. So clearly, this was a bit of a pace meltdown. You look at Signalman. I like everything that he did in here. He's very professional. He was able to get into the run a little bit earlier, and that was really while that pace was still relatively hot. So I think he deserves some bonus points for that. But at the same time, he did work out just a dream trip beneath Hernandez Jr. This is a situation where he's just down, sitting in the pocket, waiting, tips out to the 2-path, and he finishes willingly down the lane. He galloped out very well, comes home in 32.69. I don't have any real knocks about this. I suppose if you just wanted to look at it and say, well, he had a pretty good setup and a pretty good trip as far as saving ground is concerned, then sure, you can look at it and kind of maybe knock him a little bit. But I think, again, this is still a situation where he's so lightly raced, only gone out 5 times, that the professionalism that he has shown, and he continues to take marginal steps forward in each and every one of his starts. Thought this was a good effort from him, and I think there are bigger and better things to come. He's modestly bred, but this is still a bit of an exciting prospect. And whenever you have these horses that show success at the track, guess what? Their biggest race next year is going to be at Churchill Downs. So whenever you have a horse that's already proven themselves, and I understand it was over a sloppy sealed racing surface, but there's a real chance we've seen in recent years. How many derbies recently have we been run on a fast track? You can count them on one hand. You've had almost as many, I think, wet track races in the Derby than you have as far as fast track. Pluska Parfait, I thought he ran just well. Before we get off Signalman, Kenny McPeak was quoted afterwards saying he'll get a little rest probably at Payson Park for about a month. We'll ease him back into things and look at races like the Bluegrass down the road. Again, the Bluegrass would be the final prep from Keeneland getting ready to go into the Kentucky Derby. And again, there would be other races between now and then. Pluska Parfait was a horse that came from the back of the pack, tipped out, came with his run, thought he ran really well considering it was such a long sustained bid. He's one that perhaps you want to keep an eye on because he is also very, very lightly raced. Thought he looked quite good in here, and we'll see ultimately where he comes back next. Limonite, I thought he ran well. He had a little bit of trouble down the at the early portion of the race where when they broke, he got in a little bit tight and Santana had to just tap on the brakes. He didn't check severely, he just had to tap on the brakes, but that was enough for him to lose momentum, and that shuffled him all the way back to last, which again, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, really, when you look at the way this race was run, because with that hot pace signed on early, he was able to just sit at the back of the pack and then come with his run. He comes home in 31.63. Santana, after the race, was quoted saying he just needed a little more distance today. I thought he ran very well today and will improve when the distances get a little longer. I don't have any reason to say otherwise. I think he finished the way that you want to see a 2-year-old finish in these races, going 2 turns. Only his second lifetime start going 2 turns. I think Limonite is an interesting one going forward. I think you also want to keep an eye on a horse like King for a Day for Pletcher, because He was relatively close to that hot pace throughout in those early portions of the running. He was wide, certainly wider than Signal Man. He was about 4 or 5 paths off the rail, and rounding the far turn, he was the one that started to make some sort of a bold move, loomed up there, and when they continued on down the lane, he just flattened out at the end. He finished in 33.21, but I think that was a combination of a product of being relatively close to that pace and also carrying as much ground as he did. I think if he was able to save a little bit more ground, if you reverse the trips for he and Signal Man, perhaps Signal Man doesn't finish as well as he does, and he certainly doesn't win the race if you reverse the trip. So certainly these are things that you really kind of have to decipher and take a look through going forward. You have some other interesting horses in here. Topper T, I'm still not totally convinced that we have seen his best just yet. Keep in mind, he's only been with Mott twice, and he's been up on hot paces in each of those. So you still might get a good effort from Topper T at some point going forward. Knicks Go, he was too close to this hot pace, no question about it. And I had mentioned when I was talking about this race a little bit earlier in the week that I was just concerned that, boy, at what point did he had a... I mean, he was able to get out there and dictate things, but he ran hard in that Breeders' Futurity. And then he ran very, very hard in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And I was just curious what kind of effect would that race have on him here when you couple that with that hot pace that he was up there prompting. This was just a recipe for disaster for him. Knicks Go is a nice horse. He's better than most people have given him credit for. He's one I'll be interested to see what happens with him going forward as a 3-year-old. Some of the other horses in here, though, some of them probably just want to go back to the turf. A horse like Current. You know, who knows? Perhaps there'll be a scenario where dirt ultimately is what he wants. I think he's a turf horse. I think he's going to be one of those late-running ones. This will be an interesting race to see. Again, it's one thing when it's in the immediate aftermath and we can look at it and say, oh, well, this horse ran this. Ultimately, you won't really know how good these races are until these horses come back and start running back out of them, which makes these 2-year-old ones a little bit difficult to decipher, but at the same time, they're good starting off points. What you do know, Signal Man, game horse, and likes to win races. Never been out of the money in 5 lifetime starts. Twice a winner, once in a graded stakes race. Pluska Parfait, lightly raced. You know he can come with a long sustained bid. Limonite, looks like he wants additional distance. And King for a Day, the fact that he was able to navigate 2 turns for the first time, and he just got a little bit tired at the end. Considering the circumstances, a good race from him as well. Be interesting to see what these 2-year-olds ultimately turn into as 3-year-olds, but we do know Signal Man, the winner of the Kentucky Jockey Club with an 84 Beyer and a 110 Timeform US rating. There were a number of other stakes races from this long, long weekend, going back to just before Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving Day, obviously, and then all the other days over this past weekend. We can't go over them all, but we can go over many of them in a stakes montage. So you're going to have all sorts of stuff from Del Mar, Woodbine, Aqueduct, Golden Gate, you name it. It'll all be included. Here is this week's stakes montage.
Second spot, Escape Clause is coming after them. Let's see, Vexatious is starting a late run extreme outside. Homeward bound, India Mantunas breathing fire now, but hanging on gamely. Being chased home by Escape Clause. Down the centre, Siberian Iris, but it is going to be India Mantuana, Tyler Bay's
the rails, Karen Road squeezing through now. Sing and Crying to behind the centre. Brass Compass coming home down the outside and holding goal, finishing up the rail. Karen Road took the lead from Yorkton and Call Me Wally down the outside. Karen Road got away. Karen Road in front. Out on the inside, holding gold, and out wide Call Me Wally. Karen Road is the winner. Holding gold.
Tricky Escape, Lady Montour in between them. Knight of England fights on willingly. They are followed on the outside by Lady Panam, who continues to finish strongly. Golden Attitude is next. Outside of her comes Danceland. They're in the final furlong. Knight of England, a tenacious customer. Lady Panam bearing down in the center of the course. And here's Lady Panam surging to victory in the Long Island. Tricky Escape was valiant. The field turns for home. Plainsman opens up. It's a 3-length lead. Title Ready, Gronkowski finishing as well as he can, but as they come past the 8th pole, it's Plainsman in command. He's got a 4-length lead. Title Ready, and then it's Gronkowski. 16th pole, and it will be Plainsman under Joel Rosario, cruising to victory in the Discovery. Title Ready holds second in front of Gronkowski.
It's not her day today. They come for home. This one's wide open. Courteous along the inside, but Elsa is up to get the lead now. Velvet Queen's run a huge one, but it's Elka striking the front and starting to pull away, and Elsa, a devastating final 1/8 of a mile, wins it impressively. Elsa and Joe Bravo go home to score. Courteous was second.
But they have to catch Camino del Paraíso, who swings into the stretch. Montu rides the rail at big odds. It's Camino del Paraíso trying to hang in there. Editore flamboyant down the center of the track. Those three in contention. Camino del Paraíso tired, flamboyant. Editore go on. Editore between horses has the lead. Camino del Paraíso fighting, but it's not enough.
He's looking to find some racing room as Dubini turns for home. In front by a length, Blind Ambition. Now Disco Partner goes to the far outside. Kitten's Cat is on the inside, and White Flag. White Flag comes for the lead inside the 8th pole. On the inside, Kitten's Cat. Disco Partner is on the scene late. It's White Flag, Disco Partner. White Flag's in front, and White Flag wins the Aqueduct Turf Sprint Championship.
Up to challenge Kasuga, joined by Silent Sonnet down the center, Moonlit Promise. Then Al Nila down the outside, running a Let It Ride Mum and Red Cabernet. Moonlit Promise on the outside's gone to the front, and it is Moonlit Promise the leader. In second, Silent Sonnet, and Moonlit Promise in the Bessarabian going on to win. Moonlit Promise first by a length, Silent Sonnet second, Let It Ride Mum third, then Jessica
Fantastic head and head as they come to the top of the lane. Rajika is in with a shot from third as well. Homeward Bound and Flying Scotsman now bounds to the front. And Flying Scotsman, very impressive final 1/8 of a mile. Flying Scotsman drawing clear to win it easily. Rajika was second. Vanta up alongside, being sent along. These two nose and nose. This could turn into an absolute thriller here. Battle of Midway now gains the advantage. Dabster plugs right back at him though. Battle of Midway and Flavion Pratt. Dabster and Joe Talabo battling to the wire together. Battle of Midway just in front. Here's the wire.
There's your stakes montage, and let's get you the weekend's best from a buyer speed figure standpoint. We'll take a look at the DRFTV schedule events, and we'll get you out of here and on your way. Let's take a look. Starting off with the 2-year-old males on dirt. Super Steed, 87 buyer and a non-winners of one other than at Churchill Downs. 2-year-old fillies on dirt. Kira, 87, maiden special weight down at Del Mar. 2-year-old males on turf. Flying Scotsman, impressive, winning the DeMille at Del Mar with a 91 buyer. 2-year-old fillies on grass. Elsa, 79 in the Jimmy Durante at Del Mar. 3-year-old males on dirt. Bravazzo ran very, very well in that Clark Handicap with a 102 buyer. Again, I don't know if he hung or he just got beat by circumstance. We'll find out in time. 3-year-old fillies on dirt. Happy Like a Fool, 93 buyer and non-winners of 3 other than at Churchill Downs. 3-year-old males on turf. WW, 97 and a non-winners of 2 other than at Churchill. 3-year-old fillies on turf. Princess Warrior winning the Mrs. Revere at Churchill Downs with a 91 buyer. Older males on dirt. Leo Frick, the winner of the Grade 1 Clark Handicap at Churchill with a 102 buyer. Older fillies on dirt. Yorkie Poo Princess, a 96 buyer in the autumn days at Aqueduct. Older males on grass. Great Wide Open, 99 and a non-winners of 3 other than at the fairgrounds. And we have a tie for the older fillies and mares on grass. English Affair and India Mantuana, 89 buyers in the in the Cardinal Handicap, as well as the Red Carpet Handicap. Those being at Churchill and Del Mar, respectively. There you have it. The weekend's best from a buyer speed figure standpoint. If you take a look at the DRFTV schedule of events, you'll have all sorts of DRF bets races of the day, including the Grade 1 Cigar Handicap, or the Cigar Mile, I should say, coming up on Saturday at the Big A. You'll also have the Matt Bernier Show, the preview edition. You will have the DRF Players Podcast. You'll have all sorts of great things out there, including the latest edition of Out of the Gate coming on later up this week, video.drf.com, as well as the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel for all that and then some. If you've been listening live, thank you for doing so. Live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. If you listen to this thing in podcast, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or however you get your podcasts, write us a review, give us a positive rating, always greatly appreciated. Questions, comments, concerns beneath the video player on YouTube or at me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. That is going to wrap up this recap edition. I will be back at the end of the week. We'll take a look at something as far as previews are concerned, whether it is a race coming up this weekend. You'll certainly get another NFL Week 13's worth of picks with the trifecta. Disappointing weekend this past weekend, 1 and 2, but still squarely in the black, and hopefully we continue to roll along, and then we'll get you ready again for some of the big events coming up this coming weekend. So until next time, best of luck however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. This has been the Matt Bernier Show.